Florida, known for wildlife, including, of course, alligators, panthers, pythons, and a lot more.
And now a wildlife photographer and writer showing off the state's animals in her new book. It's called Wild Florida, an Animal Odyssey, and it's available as soon as tomorrow. We are so excited to be joined by the author, Kirsten Hines. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. And here is
got
the new
book
fox
right
making the
here.
cover.
Yes,
It's beautiful.
finally. And it's a fox from the Miami cemetery, historic cemetery.
Wow.
Because they're looking for a bird, and instead I found a fox in the tree.
I love
So
it.
tell us a little bit about the book and how the idea came about for you to do this.
Yeah, so I had several years ago now done a book on how to garden for wildlife in South Florida through the University Press of Florida. And I was at a Florida Native Plant Society meeting promoting that book years later. And the editor of that book came over and she was like, you know, we love your photography. We want to do another book on with your photography. So why don't you pitch an idea? And I was like, okay. And so I did some research and I realized, you know, there's not really a good comprehensive book on Florida's wildlife for the layman, you know, something that's accessible, that really gets into the biology, but is something that's understandable to non-biologists and people who this isn't really their thing. And so I pitched that idea a little bit naively. I was like, oh, I've been in South Florida for, 20 years now. I've got what I need. I've worked as a biologist. I've done photography. Like, I got it. And turns out Florida's a lot more diverse than that. So here we are, 5 years later, and the book's coming out.
It's very diverse. What else is really interesting, is the people who've lived here a long time know that it's constantly changing. We've got new invasive species that come along. What have you seen, in the 5 years working for this book, have you seen habitats and just the animals themselves that you see change over the years?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the place where I took bear pictures, ultimately, everybody kept saying, go to Ocala National Forest, you'll get lots of bear pictures there. And, the bears just kept evading me. It turns out they have this incredible sense of smell. And even when I was using this awful cover scent that's supposed to make me smell like soil, but I don't know what it was. It was not dirt. It was awful. Even after doing that, I could see the bears, but they were in the distance, and they were definitely avoiding me. And so I ended up going to the Golden Gates Estates, which is an area just outside of Naples. And when I first started going there, it was still mostly pineland. And over the 3-year period that I was going there really regularly, because the bears kept avoiding me, you could see that the pineland was becoming less and less in that time period. And in fact, the one family, when I first started going to their yard, they had bears there like every week. And then it became, every few weeks. And so there's habitat loss, I think, is the biggest issue in Florida, all of Florida, really, habitat loss. But we still have some really incredible habitats and really unique, and different each place you go, right? So it turns out Florida has 3 areas of biodiversity for the entire of North America. In the Panhandle, it's temperate biodiversity. In Central Florida, it's endemic species because it's a habitat that occurs nowhere but Florida. So we have all kinds of things like our Florida scrub jay that only occurs in that habitat. And then in southeastern Florida, here where we are a tropical biodiversity hotspot.
That's interesting.
Are there animals in your book that some Floridians might be surprised that we have in our state?
Well, in South Florida, I found nobody expected beavers.
Oh, beavers.
Oh, beaver, okay.
So yeah,
Sure.
There's beavers up in the Panhandle, and my dad's from Colorado, and he's like, "You're going to take pictures of what in Florida? Like, you got to be kidding me!" And they don't get beyond. I mean, a little bit in North Florida, but mostly the Panhandle is where you find the temperate species. So salamanders also. So there's things like that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
So you talk about kind of the game plan here. So, you go out in these and you just kind of look and see what you find, or are there times where you have to say, I've got to go get this specific animal?
Yeah, I mean, because it was a book on Florida wildlife, I knew I needed to have the big things, right? Our bear is actually different than others. It's a subspecies that's only found in Florida. So I needed the Florida bear, and I needed the Florida panther, and I needed the Florida scrub jay. So I needed some of these species that were really charismatic Florida species. So those I was definitely targeting. And then sometimes I would get lucky with other species. But I had a list of the things that really had to be in the book, and I was very targeted in going after those species in particular.
Wow.
Real quick, before we let you go, you have an event tomorrow. Tell us about that.
I am launching my book at the Palm Beach bookstore. And so it'll be from 5:30 to 7. I'll give a little bit of a talk, show some pictures, and then I'll be there to sign and talk and introduce my book to the world for the first time.
Well, we appreciate you coming into our habitat. Like to document native South Florida anchor
News
people.
anchors.
We're right here for it. Kirsten, it's been great. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we've got much more CBS 12 News at 9.